Hi, I started creating content in early March 2020. In fact, it was at the start of the pandemic. It was not intentional. It kind of fell into my lap, podcasting. I delivered 15 episodes of conversations with CJ Rose for Flex TV Florida. I interviewed guests such as Dr. Theron Williams, the author of the book series The Bible is Black History, and also the documentary maker of Hebrews to Negroes, Ron Dalton Jr. I even went on to do a tribute to the great storyteller and filmmaker Menelik Shabazz. So during this time, I received a lot of requests to come back on air because in 2021, I think, I stopped podcasting just to gather myself and really understand the space. As I said, it kind of fell into my lap. I'm quite a private person. I don't really post. I haven't got social media accounts. But I do recognize that the conversations that we create on The Naked Truth 2.0 have really touched a nerve with people from all walks of life. So based on our first content, our first episode, a reintroduction to these podcasts under The Naked Truth 2.0, where we spoke to the great healer Abi Osho and Professor Femi Bogle Assegai from the US on the subject of healing via the medium of White Nanny Black Child, that powerful documentary that was shown on Channel 5 a few months ago. We started to do a deep dive into that space of healing. And so based on that first broadcast, we've had an overwhelming response. So we've decided to do 2 further episodes on this topic. So I am delighted to have in return, back in this space, Abi Osho.
And I am more than delighted to be back. Hi, CJ.
Hi, lovely to have you again. So this is Abi Osho, who was featured in the documentary, the Channel 5 documentary, White Nanny Black Child, the healer, the person that took the survivors of that experience on a journey, also being a survivor herself, and also a great author of the book, Becoming. Welcome. I've also got return Professor Femi Bogle Assegai, the Knowledge Queen, broadcasting in from Connecticut, USA. Welcome, Professor. Lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you again and to see our beautiful sister, the healer, Abi. Hello, Abi. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Professor.
It's my pleasure to be back with you today.
Great stuff. I just want to say to yourself, Professor, that even throughout my early podcasts, the conversations with CJ Rose topic, you were one of my co-hosts. And it was at the time of lockdown where there wasn't much communication or connecting going on between people. I'm here, you're there in the US, but you were a great source of inspiration and a mother to me during those processes. So thank you for being that power of knowledge and guidance that you've been then and now. So moving on, thank you.
I am here to serve.
Thank you. So we've had overwhelming response from, I was surprised from people the public, I should say, who saw the first episode around healing and touching on that topic around the history of West Africans in the UK.
Yeah.
And how it kind of straddles the stories of the Windrush generation,
Yes.
early Caribbeans in the UK. We share similar stories, similar trauma or associated trauma based on the experiences that we've had.
Yeah.
And I've collated the most salient points, I think, from the audience, from people that have contacted me. And can I say that I got contacted via my personal contact information, which is amazing. But I'm going to encourage the audience that if you do have feedback, do it via the YouTube comment section.
Yes, please.
So throughout our conversation, I'm going to be reading some of the feedback back to us. But I wanted to start with this one, which I thought it was very touching and also relevant, because for us, we want to use our experience to tell our stories and to affect people all over the world from all different parts of life.
Yeah.
So this is from a woman in the UK. And she says, I'm not a woman of colour, but I resonated with a lot that was said. This is in relation to the first podcast. Thank you for putting it out there and for being brave. What resonated for me was that when I had my first child, a lot of traumas from my childhood revisited me. And I believe that this would be the same for a lot of women who have suppressed deep trauma with a capital T and with a small t. Knowing these women's stories, knowing your culture, your background, which is a story of tyranny, a story of colonialism, it's all there. I often think about families in South Africa, and the sadness and the trauma of that country lives on. I lived in Cambodia, and the suffering and trauma of the genocide that happened under the Pol Pot regime, that genocide still lived on and was in the atmosphere and the genetics of the people and the generations afterward. I thought that was a very powerful response from a member of the audience. She was touched by our story and evolved it into how other women, in fact, I think, even her own traumatic experience that came to light when she had her first child. So I just wanted to touch, before I go to Professor Femi, because there's something in there that she talked about generational trauma happening. I just wanted to touch a little bit on your work. And now the documentary has gone out. It's out there. It's even it's up for a BAFTA award.
It is
amazing.
Yeah.
Has that impacted your work? Are you getting more outreach from all communities, from women of all backgrounds around healing trauma?
I'm still getting, I guess, people connecting with me from the Black and Brown community. And that's because it's the Black and Brown community that I'm really connecting with. And what I will add to that is in the earlier days, I had got some feedback that came via email from two white ladies who were both social workers, actually. And what they had said to me, one in particular had said that she had seen the film. It had really touched her. She worked in the fostering and adoption department, but she had never actually heard the story told in that way. And so one of the things that she'd wanted to do was she wanted to see if there was a way that she could bring the film White Nanny, Black Child into the domain of her own social worker team so that they could actually watch it as part of their continued professional development, which I thought was quite incredible, actually, and that wasn't something I was expecting. And I think just kind of going back to your point and who raised this, whilst this is our story, the West African story of private fostering, many people deem it farming. That's the term that it was given. 70,000 of us went through this. It's about identity, and it's about belonging, and it's about trauma, and that's a global message that will touch many, many people in different ways because our experience is our experience, right? However, I think it's quite interesting that you're getting this feedback from people that are outside of our community, and they have been relating their own experiences or understandings of it from that place.
Powerful. Thank you. Professor, I'm just going to read an excerpt from the last sentence. The genocide still lived on and was in the atmosphere and the genetics of people and the generations afterwards, referring to the Cambodian situation under the Pol Pot regime. You used the word epigenetic in our previous series, and somebody reached out to me about that, a very famous radio personality, and he said, wow, epigenetic, that word I'd never heard before, and it's really resonating with me. Could you expand on this term and what it means, which the viewer had picked up on? She says it's in the generations and it's perpetuating and growing. It's in the atmosphere, but it's that epigenetic memory. that holds trauma, how does that relate to us as a people?
Let me just say this. If there's a noise in our background, it's my grandchildren. I'm taping this
Epigenetic.
from home.
Yes.
So let me just preface my comments with that. They're insisting on seeing grandma. They're arriving in the household and they cannot see me, of course, not right now.
Yeah.
Epigenetic, really, really important. What the science has now shown us is that we, meaning human beings, not just people of African ancestry, but human beings, carry trauma in our bloodstream. It is in our DNA. Epigenetic is the study of how cells control gene activity without changing the DNA sequence. So the term literally means in addition to changes in genetic sequence. So any kind of trauma that our family lineage has experienced, we carry that today. I don't think we as people of African ancestry find that unusual, in that we experience a tremendous amount of pain and trauma on a daily basis. Many times we're not quite sure where it's coming from. Our whole disposition, our the way that we behave towards each other as well as others, much of that is coming from the pain that we have experienced, that our family members have experienced, our mothers in particular, because it is the mother's lineage that becomes important, because the mother carries the child, and so that trauma is passed down through the mother's blood cells, if you will. So epigenetic, we're going to hear that term more and more as we begin to address healing, the need for us to come together and to heal ourselves as individuals as well as collectively. And again, many of us have got all manner of experiences that need to be healed, but we do not recognize it as such. And certainly the epigenetic piece we do not recognize. So that the anger, for example, that we experience, we don't recognize. Much of the microaggressions that we experience on a daily basis today in our life experience present us with all kinds of responses that we don't understand. For example, on a daily basis, most of us are having to explain our very existence. Why is it that you need to be treated as a human being like everybody else? This happens to us if we're shopping, this happens to us in the workplace, this happens to us in schools. And so that is compounding the pain and the trauma that we bring as a result of what our ancestors experienced. So epigenetic is a term that we're going to be seeing and hearing much more about, certainly as it relates to our attempting to heal ourselves.
So it's been scientifically proven that the DNA is found in the mother's lineage. We were speaking about this a few weeks ago, Professor, when we were kind of going through the topics of this the second podcast. So, and this is to both of you actually, and I'm going to ask you first because to comment on this. Is the responsibility then for us as a people to heal lies first with a matrilineal line? We talked about imploding because that's what you're seeing, and much of the microaggressions that you're seeing in our community, in our families, one to the other, it's imploding. It's pain that's playing itself out, and we're imploding on ourselves. Is it the matriarch's role to kick off this healing, to do this, the self-analysis?
The self-assessment, the self-analysis. First of all, I don't think the healing is mutually exclusive. It's not women and then men, or men and then women. But I think what is important for us to recognize is that it does come through the womb. It's something that is matrilineal. It comes through the woman. And so as women, as mothers of the culture, if you will, as mothers of the civilization, if you will, we have a responsibility and a duty, I believe, to address the issue in our families, in our immediate family and our extended family, and to do so in a way that explains to family members that this is not a matter of blame, that we're engaging in. This is something that is biologically determined and that we have to address it if in fact we're going to have healthy families and healthy individuals. So yes, women do have a major role to play.
Abi, what would you say to that?
Yeah, and I agree with Professor Femi in that we as women do have a major role to play, because when the child comes through our womb, it's my belief that, you know, they come through our womb, they come through like a spiritual channel, and once they've actually come through that spiritual channel, they are then here in the physical form. But everything that happens within us, everything that happens within our own frequency that all of us carry, we are, you know, we carry our child is carrying that with him or her as well. So I think that we don't always know ourselves when we're carrying our children, and we don't know what we're passing on to them. But when it gets to the stage that we can have those conversations, and I think personally from an early age, because there's so much more information that's coming into our children that is out of our control. And much of that information we know is not true. Much of it is indoctrination. So when we get the opportunity, just like Professor Femi has her grandchildren with her now, we get the opportunity to have these, you know, lighter conversations with children, but albeit really important about our own healing. I talk more about the healing than I do the trauma. I think it's really important that we start to have the conversations and understand the impact that we're having on our children, even though at those younger ages they might not understand it themselves. But what we're doing is we're fine-tuning them. We're refining our own messages. Now we're in a place of understanding to ensure that they have a stronger foundation for themselves as they have to carry their own understanding and their own responsibility through life.
I'm picking up on some key words that you've used, Professor, in these conversations, and you spoke in the first series about this is a Sankofa moment for us, and or for anyone that wants to heal. And I'm going to ask you to highlight what Sankofa is. But I know, Abi, you mentioned that you deal with the healing more so than the trauma, but isn't understanding the trauma but not dwelling there, this is probably to Femi, Professor, understanding our own trauma, that Sankofa moment, is that not as important in terms of that healing journey, that healing process? So what is Sankofa, and is it not an important process of healing?
Okay, so Sankofa is a Ghanaian term, and it's the name of a bird, a Sankofa bird. This is a bird that looks back before it flies off. And it always looks back, and you'll see this bird in all manner of artistic works within the diaspora, because we've taken it as a symbol, if you will, that tells us what we need to do in order to begin that healing process and in order to fortify ourselves, if you will, against the continued microaggression and aggressions that we experience despite being freed from chattel slavery. So Sankofa means for us, we must look back at our history, at our past, in order to go forward and know what it is and why it is that we're going forward. So it's intentional. It's something that sets our intentions, if you will, and tells us that without knowing our past, we're unlikely to be able to do what we need to do in order to heal ourselves as we move forward in the future. So yes, we need to look back, but we do not need to ruminate on the trauma and the traumas. We do not need to ruminate on the vicious, traumatizing, terrorizing activities that visited upon us and that continues to be visited upon us, particularly on the continent. But you know, we need to understand that that's all part of our history, and that's all part of what we need to look at and know continues to give us pain. Because where one of us is in pain, anywhere on the planet, we're all in pain, and that's humanity, period.
Okay. You mentioned the Sankofa, and I just wanted to say that the Sankofa bird is part of a collection of Adinkra symbols.
Yes.
And the Adinkra symbols are visual symbols originating from West Africa. They were used in fabrics, logos. There were symbols of expression. And what I've grown to find out is that these symbols have been used to form the logos and symbols that you see throughout Western civilization and Western culture. Currently, to date, a lot of symbols are based on the Adinkra symbology. So, look,
Yes.
the Sankofa was one of the first in the origins of symbols.
Yes.
The Sankofa bird. So,
And
you
thank
talk
you-
about
thank you for
history.
that.
Sorry.
No, I said thank you for that.
Okay.
That's
You talk about history, and I just wanted to read this response from someone from Russia. She's in relation to the first podcast on healing. She says, "I love this. It made me to reflect so much, and I have learned a lot about UK history. Wow." I think from my own experience, my own lived experience, because I think lived experiences are very important in this conversation as well. And I'm going to talk about microaggressions that I feel that not that I feel actually, that I know that I come up against in my professional capacity. Okay. And I often, sometimes what I do now as I'm in my third quarter, as someone once put it, that I don't challenge, I observe these microaggressions as they come through. And I think you're doing this because you don't know my history, even my ancient history, but you don't know my kind of history on this earth in my profession. How important is it, Abi, for us in these conversations, in your book, in the work that you do, to ensure that our history, that we tell the story of our history from our perspective, because we know it, right? So that we can teach others, so they can have a little bit more empathy and self-reflection, because it's about taking ownership of self, empathy and self-reflection with how they see us.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think it is extremely important, and for a couple of reasons, really. Just in terms of, my book Becoming Visible, and it talks about the West African story, primarily Nigerian, but also Ghanaian, were touched by this, by the private fostering, and, all of those lived experiences that 70,000 of us went through. And so I think when other people start to have a better understanding of us and, what we've experienced, they can enhance their own understanding. Now, within that, there is also, and I'm going to say this word, it's a little bit made up, an uncomfortability within actually, one, watching the documentary and understanding that happened, and the Caucasian people were the big part of it because they were the people that were looking after us. So there's also, whilst the feedback is coming and people are watching, it's not a comfortable watch. And so depending on where you are on your own journey, that is definitely going to activate some things within you. And some people that will be activated and start to almost ask themselves questions about it. They'll do their own self-reflection. Other people won't want to see it at all. It's almost as if it hasn't happened because it's too painful, it's too uncomfortable, and they don't want to sit in that space, And so I think that we get to be able to share our story, and we're able to be ourselves as our own historians, because we know much of our story was never told or written by us. It was written by the people that wanted it to suit what they wanted other people to see and hear at the time. And so this the way that we're doing it now also reminds me of, you know, our own griot, our own oral storytelling tradition, which is our ancient history, and we've always passed down these powerful stories, some of which I think we've lost. But when we're doing this kind of work, we get to totally lean in and align with our oral storytelling skills, because they are extremely powerful.
Absolutely. They absolutely are.
I wanted to address history as part of the healing. And you talk about not ruminating on the past. And I find, as a nation of people scattered to the four corners of the world, we have been somewhat disempowered. It's evident, right? Wherever you find us. And when I talk about the enslavement of our people, I tend to get from my counterparts who are not from our community, well, there's modern slavery that's happening on the planet right now, the child trafficking situations. And we by no means negate any of this, but I always have to go back to the specific trauma that was perpetuated over 400 years of not just chattel slavery, but the degradation of our language, our culture, our names. Because my name's CJ Rose. Rose is certainly not my indigenous name. And if you don't know your language, how does that impact a generation, a nation? And it seems to me that when I'm dealing with other nations, my other brothers and sisters on this planet, there doesn't seem to be an understanding on the deep-rooted trauma that damaged the nation across all the points that I just mentioned, but also the economical degradation. It's almost like, you know, you have a people that's always trying to get up.
Well,
Speak a little bit to that history, Professor.
I think that history is, we have to tell it. And we have to tell it because we have experienced it, our ancestors have experienced it. The absolute terror that was visited on African people is unspeakable. It is unspeakable, all right? To remove from a people their deity, you know, their sense of who God is and what God represents to them and so on and so forth, because we've had that removed. You know, you're talking about our very soul, our very being, right? Our very spirit. So the destruction of African people took place in its totality. So we are now existing as a shell, quite frankly. We are in a place where we are prepared in many instances to defend the interest of every other group of people on the planet before defending our own, because we have been indoctrinated to do that. We know what it means to make other groups of people feel comfortable and to make ourselves uncomfortable. That's a powerful piece of the microaggression, because you know when to shut up, when not to say what you need to say or want to say. You know what silence looks like. You know, at this point, I think it's important to talk about the difference between post-traumatic syndrome and post-traumatic disease. Because what Dr. Guri calls this process that we have experienced and that we continue to live in and with is post-traumatic slave syndrome. Now, post-traumatic disorder is a disease. That means you can take a pill for it. You can somehow go to the doctor and find something, they'll give you something for it. But a syndrome is something that is a pattern of behavior. So we have post-traumatic slave syndrome. So that, for example, we raise our children and continue to raise our children within the framework given to us by the European. And we understand ourselves as Black European people. We have now reached a point, thank the ancestors, where we understand that none of that has saved us. We are still in a place of uncomfortability. Is that the word you used? Or
It is
discomfort?
indeed.
Or discomfort. I'm in America. They make up words, and so that's okay for me. They make
Look,
up.
we created the word bling, bling bling,
Right,
which is a made
right,
up word.
right.
It's now in the Oxford
Now in the
Dictionary. So
dictionary,
do your
right?
thing. Yes.
Yeah. So we understand what it means to make everybody else comfortable. So, but we have now recognized that there is a need for us to heal ourselves, heal our families, and to talk about what that looks like. And that's our challenge. How do we talk about it in such a way, regardless of who is uncomfortable, regardless of who is made to not feel uh, good, if you like, as Abby said, regardless of who um, can't deal with the pain or can't deal with what. But the fact of the matter is, and I think she's right when she said that our history will enhance the understanding of others about who we are. It will enhance their understanding because what they have been given in the past, just like what we have been given, is fed the same diet. It's an indoctrination about inferior, superior. And this notion of inferiority and superiority, that dichotomy, is an intellectual lie. We now know that.
Yes.
The human genome tells us that we're all out of Africa.
Yeah.
All of us.
The
Every one of
mitochondrial
us.
Eve.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we're all out of Africa, right? And I don't know if you noticed the other day, Lupita,
Mm-hmm.
she did her DNA, and it's found that she's actually linked to the original woman, the mitochondrial Eve, as it were. She's actually, her DNA is that DNA. So the idea that there's a superior inferior being on the planet is just a lie. And that's something that we have to take on, I believe, at every turn. And we have to begin to tell the truth to our children inside of our households at the time that we're able to do that and bring about some level of understanding, and certainly within the academy, where there is, to my mind, the intellectual lie that continues to be perpetuated. It needs to be challenged.
And to show the extent of that, the enslavement and the how it was, it just didn't, we weren't just scattered to one nation. I've got a feedback here from someone of the Dominican Republic, and she said, I shared this with a friend of Chaguasian descent, which is an Indo-African ethnic group originating from enslaved Africans in France. And she said, we need more people telling their stories of being physically uprooted and how they have re-engaged with their ancestral roots. So that's just a nod to the truth about telling our stories, because we have a saying in our community, each one teach one.
Elimi.
And absolutely.
E20.
And if we don't start to do that for ourselves, what use are we? And I don't think we need to rely on the BBC. I don't think we need to rely on the educational institutions that exist in the world to tell us our history. You mentioned something quite important, the griot. The griot. It is our tradition.
Absolutely.
Even to this day, that if you go back to certain villages in the Gambia, in West Africa, you will have elders that can tell you the oral history of the tribes from way back when. And they do that through storytelling and music.
Yeah.
And I love kora music.
Yeah.
I actually believe that's the first harp.
It is the first harp.
It is the first harp.
It is
I love that too.
Yes. So more power to us as women, the matriarch, coming together to reflect on the past. And, people might say, in 2024, my son says this, he says, Mom, I'm not in a struggle, I'm in a progression. And I totally hear him,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not in a struggle anymore
No,
because I
we're not.
know the truth.
No,
Yeah,
we're
I'm not
not in a
struggling.
struggle anymore.
Yeah, so my only struggle, and I think if I may say this to the audience, to kind of reacclimatize, readjust our minds, that the only struggle that we should be in right now is the struggle for self-development. Kuji Chagalia,
Yes.
that's right.
Yeah.
Healing
Yes.
for
Yeah.
ascension.
Yeah.
Speak on that,
Yeah.
Abby.
I think when we allow ourselves, so one of the things that I did want to mention, and I am going back to, you know, ourselves as electromagnetic frequency beings. You know, our heart is 60 times more powerful than our brain. The electromagnetic frequency that runs through our heart is 60 times more powerful than our brain. And I say that twice because I think it's very, very powerful information. And when we allow ourselves to connect back to our heart, when we allow ourselves to connect back to our own first frequency, it's from that place that we really start to connect with who we are becoming. The external source, everything that's out there outside of us, is never about us, and it's out there to cause chaos and confusion so that we allow ourselves to always be distant. But when we connect back, when we drop out of our heads into our heart and ask ourselves that question, like, who am I becoming right now? Who am I right now? You know, when I'm whole and I'm safe and I feel trusted, you get to answer your own question for yourself. You get to sit in reflection in that space and really ask yourself the question, like, yeah, who am I becoming at this stage of my life? Because every day is going to be different. But until we make those decisions and have the courage, because sometimes it takes courage if you've suffered and you are on your healing journey, sometimes you don't want to connect back to yourself because you don't think you can manage what might come up. You don't want to open up the tsunami. You'd rather keep those feelings subdued. But we all know, you know, as women sitting around this table, the more subdued you keep those emotions, the more they're actually coming out without you even seeing it, and the more you're not even living your life. And so you're in a sleep. It's like you're in a haze. And so we get to, you know, come together to share these stories, to share our voices that not only empower ourselves, but will empower so many other people that might not yet be ready to share their voice, that might not yet be ready to really stand in their own foundation of healing. But all the time we're doing this, it helps them to get one step closer to who they are becoming.
Could not agree with you more, Abby. Could not agree with you more. You know, you're right about the heart frequency and being the first frequency. That is so important. We need to constantly ask ourselves, you know, how do we keep ourselves well? And by well, I'm talking about in totality. So I don't mean just mere physical wellness, emotional, psychological, spiritual. How do we keep ourselves well and in a state of balance? The answers are not external. They are right here inside of us. You know, so how do we do that in the midst of having to live, if you will, in a place where, and I'm going to keep talking about microaggressions because when we live diaspora, that's what we're dealing with all the time, all the time, all day long. You know, we literally are having to legitimize our very existence. So how do we stay well in the midst of that? You know, when our very experience, our very existence, as it were, is questioned, and our very life experience is also questioned. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. And courage is a critical piece of it because sometimes, as I said earlier, because we know how to make other groups of people feel comfortable, how not to be disruptive, how not to be challenging, we make ourselves very ill, very, very ill. Hypertension, diabetes, anxiety, and all kinds of other ailments that we suffer as a result of the microaggressions that we experience and walking around almost on eggshells and not wanting to deal with those things, those feelings, those experiences that are causing us pain, not wanting to understand our rage, our anger, and our fears. You know, we push them down, push them aside. So I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you.
Abi, I thought it was quite profound that you talked about us as electromagnetic beings. Very profound statement there, because we know this. And the
Yes.
heart is the epicenter of man. The
Yes.
download I got in 2017 actually about the heart being the epicenter of man.
Yeah.
And in the heart is where the seat of the Most High is. And because, and you see in scripture as well about the heart being wicked, or no one knows the heart, because that's where it all starts from. It's not the brain, it's the heart. And, you know, I always say, don't just take it from us. Please go and do some research for yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, to see that, you know, what we bring here is the naked truth. And this leads me on to a response I got from someone in the UK. She says, "Oh my God, I have just finished watching the podcast. I was mesmerized. I understand what Abi said about overcoming her traumatic experiences of abuse. I understand forgiveness that we should open our hearts to. I'm trying to do it step by step." Very powerful, and relates to the heart and that vibrational piece. Forgiveness. That is the key of self and the wider nations. Because this whole thing of blame, we blame, and we're not blaming anyone on this channel. We're simply making historical references of truth to facilitate these conversations. So we're not blaming, but we know that some people had a hand in this and still have a hand in this.
Yeah.
But here we come with love and not hatred, right? Because surely goodness and mercy shall follow us all the days of our
lives.
existence on this planet. So no matter what you do, no matter how you frame it, no matter how you keep us down, we will always rise because we come with the love of the Most High already embedded in us. And we need to understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
And understand the power of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Speak on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, CJ, when we are able to first and foremost forgive ourselves, that's really where it starts. Forgiveness starts with self. It doesn't start with forgiving others if you haven't forgiven yourself, because you're not really telling yourself the truth. But when you're able to be in a place where you forgive yourself from the heart space we're speaking about, it allows you, it gives you, give yourself permission to forgive those that have betrayed you, that have made you angry, that have made you upset, whatever those things are. And it's almost like when you give yourself permission to do that, it's like you're breathing for the first time. You think you've been breathing, but you start to breathe far more deeply than the chest breaths that you thought was the way that you were supposed to breathe, because you haven't allowed yourself that depth of breath, because the depth of breath connects you further into the emotion that you don't want to deal with. So when we allow ourselves to forgive, it is like a permission slip. It's like, okay, now I'm breathing, now I'm living, now I can start to put the dots together and start to understand in a much wider context why I'm here and what is the work that I'm supposed to be doing. Because up until that point, you're blocking yourself. Like, you know, we open ourselves, I talk about energy a lot. And when we are in our highest energy, when we are using our highest frequency, we are open to receiving what it is that we intentionally want. We receive all the time. We receive stuff we don't want because we're not being intentional. But when we become intentional about what it is we want to receive into our life, then we can start to manage that much more effectively. And it's also from that space that the energy and the frequency that we find ourselves in, we are then attracting other people. They don't know why they want to be around our space. They don't know why they want to be in what I call our auric energy field, which is our energy field. When we are maybe being a little bit indecisive or a little bit confused, our energy field shrinks. So that may be around 1 to 2 foot around us. But when we are standing in our power, when we are fully in our power, our energy field expands out to 6 foot. So anybody walking into that space, they're going to feel that. And they'll do one of two things. They'll be like, I really want to be around this energy because I can feel it lifting me. Or they may feel a little bit insecure. And from that insecurity, they will either step away, or they may try to bring you to a level where you are lowering your energy field because that's where they find themselves. So everything is energy, everything is frequency, and we are constantly receiving as a people. And we get to choose and we get to decide. And once we give ourselves our own permission, we are giving so many other people permission slips to really live into the frequency of who they're becoming. And that's really
It
powerful.
could not be more truthful. That is the truth. That is a word. Say that. And before we got this deep in terms of our understanding of that, as you've just explained it, we tend to hear ourselves say vibes, right? The word vibes is what
like
we
the
use all
vibes.
the time, the vibes.
Yes.
So we understand the power of that energy that you're talking about. And when you experience it, it is extremely powerful. It is extremely powerful. And I find it is a useful porthole to have the conversations around healing with our people, because we all understand that term vibes. We all understand it. And when we talk about that, we can get to that place to have the conversations that we need to have in a lot of instances.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just add, you just reminded me of something there, Professor Femi, in terms of, vibes, and I was really feeling that person's vibe, or I wasn't feeling that person's vibe. Or we might say something like, my spirit didn't take to that person, or my spirit really took to that person. And we actually don't always understand the depth and how powerful those phrases are, because we're feeling, like you're saying, we're feeling that energy, but we might not use those words. But we know, without that person opening their mouth, we know that we're not on their vibe, or we didn't take to their spirit, or we are on their vibe and we absolutely love their spirit. There's just an innate knowing within us. So thank you for reminding me of that.
I wanted to just share a story about myself, actually. I think the naked truth is applicable to us all. And, my journey in life, I'm going to say, started in 2007. Prior to that, I was just an individual fanatical about my industry, which was the fashion industry. And I just lived my life for fashion. I designed it. I lived it. I breathed it. Everyone knew me for it. It's what paid the bills. And I worked in the industry for 25 years for just about all the brands you can think of in the UK and some in the US. But my journey of discovery of my soul started in 2007, but it was a traumatic one. It wasn't cool. It was trauma. And that trauma, and trying to understand why I went through what I went through because of epigenetic stuff, it's only coming to light today. So even whilst I'm doing these podcasts and I'm having these conversations, I'm evolving as all the time. And I recently, a Tuesday, I was going to speak on a panel at a conference, and I was walking through London Bridge Station, and it's almost like something happened where I told myself, oh my gosh, do you realize that all your life, but particularly since 2007, when you went through that traumatic experience, that all you've done is fed yourself negativity about yourself. Oh, it was my fault. Oh, I said it wrong. Oh my gosh, that happened because they didn't like me because I'm such a mess. Oh my, you. And I caught myself in that very moment. I had to ring my son and say to him, oh my gosh, guess what just happened? And he's like, Mom, I've been trying to tell you that your cycle, and I didn't realize I knew I was in it, but I couldn't identify that I was in it. Does that make sense?
It makes 100%
And it was almost like something opened up. I was like, oh my gosh, a balloon has just deflated inside, and I feel that everything is coming out.
Yeah.
To the point where I wake up, I go for my walk or my run, and I catch myself in that cycle. I go, oh, hold on a minute. There you go. You're going back, aren't you? And then I remind myself to live in the now. Some people might say, well, I do that already. More power. For me, it's a revelation. And I realized that whilst I was in this space of self-annihilation from self, I was, me did attract some breed of people, you see. Me did attract some breed of situation, you see. And
Yes.
couldn't
Yes,
understand
yes,
why I was ruminating in a loop.
Yes.
yes.
Absolutely.
So I want to share that experience because it's real electromagnetic
It
energy
is very.
It really is.
and how we have found ourselves in a cycle that we've created now. So a hand, there was a mighty hand that was played in the part of bringing us into a place. But all we've done now is ruminate and create, and we've now kept that cycle going. So they just step out and watch, send in their
Mhm.
gatekeepers that sometimes look like us, and
Yeah.
allow us to just
Yes.
carry on this process, because as long as we stay in the cycle of blame, self-degradation, imploding on ourselves, one to the other, amongst our families, our relationships, male and female, female and female, male and male,
Mhm.
we are perpetuating that
Yes.
cycle on all levels. I just wanted to share that very sort of that discovery of myself,
Yeah.
even
But
at my old
it's
age.
the real truth
It's
about
a real truth.
the majority of our people. It is the real truth because it's a control mechanism. It's a control mechanism when your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit is literally using the information that we have been given, we have been indoctrinated into believing to control our own bodies, our own selves. Other people don't have to control us or worry about us. They know exactly how to do what they need to do. You
I
know,
want to ask the question
Yeah.
of you, Professor, and I want to touch on our economic status in the world. Um, I know Tanzania, or was it Uganda? Tanzania have just launched the ZIG currency, which is backed by gold,
hmm
which I think is a really powerful statement for the continent, because not only did these experiences of colonialism and enslavement happen, which also destroyed our economy and our financial economic status in the world, how can we, through our healing, I'm going to ask this, I'm just trying to frame the question, not that I don't know what to ask, I'm trying to frame the question in the right way. Once we take control of our healing, of our own self worth, our self development, will that affect or improve our economic status, community wise, family wise, then expands into our nations?
that's a natural developmental piece. That's a piece that will because when you value yourself, you're going to intentionally do those things that will preserve that value. And we're our value from an economic standpoint is not a capitalist value, so that we don't view human beings as a means to an end. All right, so it's not an African principle to use human beings for purposes of acquiring resources, wealth, what have you, and then discarding them. That is not a natural, organic, cultural truth. Our economic approach has always been one that allows for everybody to eat, right? And for everybody to prosper, as it were, in the Royce sense of the word. So, if you will, once we become conscious and healthy, and these things are all happening all the time, nothing is mutually exclusive, then the likelihood is that we will do those things economically that will ultimately benefit the collective, right? It could benefit other people, but it will ultimately benefit the collective. So that, for example, the notion that we will need to tell each other that it's important to be supportive of each other, that should leave us. That should go out the window because we should be doing that as a matter of course. Many of us do that now. You know, for example, when I say to people, I don't wear African clothes as a fashion. I wear it because I understand the economic impact of it. I I I when I'm buying cloth, I look to see whether I'm buying cloth from Holland or whether I'm buying cloth that was done and made on the continent by the people in the villages, so on and so forth, because I know where that money is going. So I'm intentionally how I spend my money, you know. So overall, economically, we should be doing better. But of course, does not just only speak to us as individuals, it speaks to our governments. Because when you look at the continent itself, you're talking about a continent that has every single thing it needs, and the world also needs every single thing it needs to thrive, and the world also needs. However, all of those resources are being exploited as we speak because the people responsible for owning the resources, extracting the resources, refining the resources, turning those resources into whatever it is they turn them into, don't look like us. And they give to those nations a pittance. The fact that we now have, let's broaden the conversation, that we now have BRICS in place. BRICS is the new economic order, right? Which is Brazil, India, South Africa, and China, and so on, Russia, and so on. That is a statement to the West, a huge statement to the West, that the American dollar will no longer dictate how you negotiate with us for our resources. You will now have to pay for our resources and pay in a way that will benefit us economically. Because in order for the people on the ground to benefit, the nations, the governments themselves must have in place economic systems and policies that protect the population, which has not been the case in most of those countries. And so now that we're getting some courage in some of those nations and beginning to recognize what has gone on in the past, then actions like the one that you just spoke of is being taken. And in fact, there are many different nations that are doing some significant things around standing up to the West, if you will.
I'm glad you've talked about clothing as a commodity.
Yeah.
That's my thing
Yeah.
still. And, let's take the Asian community in the UK as an example, where I believe the community straddles between their own culture and Western culture. But one thing I see being upheld is the clothing side of things, because I grew up in East London. I went to school quite close to a place called Green Street, which now is it's almost like the Oxford Street for the Asian community, because you can go on that street and find everything to do where clothing is concerned with Asian culture.
Like Ealing Road, Wembley.
Would you have, and in Wembley, yes,
Ealing,
of course.
Ealing Road.
Yeah. And so I say this about my own people, and I'm going to refer to Nigeria as an example, because I consider Nigeria and Nigerians to be progressive financially, but not necessarily all of us are progressive spiritually or in the way that we ought to do to advance community. But it's all about self and a showing of wealth.
Yeah.
And it always irks me to see that I know that there are the most amazing designers in Africa.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in Nigeria. But yet, when I see a wealthy Nigerian, either in the UK, I was in Jamaica recently, and there were a number of them, they are decked out in Gucci, Fendi, Prada, Rolex, God knows what. And I stand there and I think, do you realize what it is that you're doing in coveting other brands? For instance,
They don't.
Louis Vuitton started off as a very small brand that made either leathersmiths. Okay, so they made leather products
Using the symbols of Africa.
Using Adinkra symbols, because those symbols are African on that Louis Vuitton monogram, Ghanaian.
To be specific.
Just to be specific.
Yeah.
That monogram is West African, Ghanaian to be specific. But yet that brand evolved itself into a luxury empire. So now they've put, I think it's Pharrell. I think Pharrell might be the creative director of Louis Vuitton.
Okay.
Somebody looked that up. But my point is that, and they know that because where luxury was so before something you could not reach, they realize that they need our community to be repping those names, right, in the videos to boost their sales,
Yeah.
right? They know this, but before it wasn't like that. So they've realized within the last 10 to 15 years, the power of the marketing that we can bring to even a luxury brand like Louis Vuitton, right? Why can't we do this for ourselves with the amount of creativity that I've seen in our community? Why
Because of
is
the
it?
same conversation
Because
was
of the
having.
same conversation.
Yeah.
So my thing is, when I see a wealthy person from our community in your Rolls Royce and your Louis Vuitton, it doesn't affect me because I realize that something isn't quite right in your
Absolutely.
thinking.
Right.
That you cannot help me. You cannot do the Sankofa work
No, there you go. There you
to
go.
pull somebody up,
There you
to
go.
pull somebody forward.
There you go.
And I think these points need to be addressed and we need to be conscious. We can't be like everybody else, just running
it is
around
for
and doing
that
what everybody else
reason.
does. Because it's not been a level playing field.
No.
So we
CJ,
need to be very conscious of our decisions. Sorry.
it is for that very reason why in the United States you have a Black population that if it were a country, it would be the 11th richest country on the planet. But you have Black people in America with little or no real power. And you have Black people in America still living in ghettos, still being at the bottom of the totem pole, still not having a voice that carries the kind of power that their money dictates that they should carry. Why? Because they spend it and squander it on everything and everybody except themselves. The idea of spending their money with each other does not compute. Does not compute. It's an uphill battle trying to get Black people in America to understand that there are Black people elsewhere on the planet. It's beginning to change, and that they need to be connected to those Black people on the planet, and that when they spend their money, they should be spending it with themselves, at least twice before it leaves the Black community, because money coming into the Black community does not stay. It goes right out. Right out. You get paid, you go to the mall. You don't own anything at the mall. That money is given back to the other businesses, the other communities. And so Black wealth in America means nothing. When one generation dies, it all disappears because they don't have any economic understanding, any wealth generation understanding. It is all about consumption because that population has been trained to consume. So it's all about consumption. It's all about spending the money on what is out there. Advertising and marketing, extremely powerful. I don't think anybody does that as well as the United States. And so Black people here are captivated by that. And they spend thousands and thousands of dollars on, well, let's not talk about sneakers, but now they're into European cars. So the Maseratis and the Mercedes, they've just discovered Mercedes, so everybody has to have one. And it's all about following behind each other to acquire these things that it's superficial status, but I know that it speaks to the lack of understanding of self, the lack of understanding of identity, the lack of understanding of history. And so if you don't know who you are, you're simply going to be a shell, which unfortunately is where many of our people are. You know, the work is being done, and the work is being done on the ground by many people, but it's not significant enough to make a dent such that you can hear the voice of Black people in this country speaking powerfully about issues of concern to Black people. So yeah, this place demonstrates what you've just talked about there very powerfully. Very, very powerfully. And you daren't criticize them about it.
No, I know. So we've got before we go into part 3 of this session, just to round up part 2 around ownership of that healing space, not just to advance us to balance, but also to propel us into an economic progressive state, basically. Even if it's not in our nations, but definitely in our families, and building that generational wealth that is necessary to advance stage by stage. How can the healing help that? I know Professor just mentioned, I think, quite poignant pieces that she's spoken to. But how can the healing work help us in that space?
I think when we allow ourselves to think about what healing might look like for us, when we allow ourselves to be more vulnerable rather than being the quote unquote strong black woman or strong black man that's out there, forging the way outside of him or herself, when we bring ourselves back to who we are, I think what we're doing is there's so much strength that is in our vulnerability. But until we are open to being vulnerable around our families, and that isn't always going to be easy because there's always a family dynamic, as we know, within everybody's family. But it also, it's kind of like the healing journey starts with self, as we know, and starts with those family members that are open to also allowing themselves to be on that same journey, because not every family member will be. And I think we also get to discern within a family, yes, they are our brothers, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles, our cousins, but there will be people that we know we can speak with and to, that will understand the connection and the energetic space that we're in, and there'll be others that aren't ready. And so we also have to remember that not everybody's going to be ready at the same time, and you work with those that are ready now. And from that space of healing, and this is my own experience, I speak a little bit like you mentioned before for yours, Carol. But I know for me, when I kind of stepped into my own healing journey, when I started to understand that this person that I was trying to be externally, because I was too scared to connect with who I was from here, because it was too painful, when I sat with myself and started to really undo those layers and do that work, it was like a rebirth. But I was so afraid to do it for so long because I knew it was going to be painful. But as soon as I started to kind of connect with who I was becoming, who I was at this stage of my life, the whole rebirth of Abi Osho, it was like I could bring all of my truth to my conversations without the fear of being judged, without the fear of being less than, without the fear of being small, even though those thoughts would have crossed my mind all of the time before. I was able to really stand in my truth. And from that place, my healing started. And I know other members of my family, I helped them to start their own healing journeys too. But I had to be vulnerable.
I agree.
First.
Absolutely agree.
I had to be the pioneer in a way, the leader of that.
Absolutely agree.
And is
Absolutely agree.
There's one in every family, I think.
Yes, but
No?
the other thing,
Yes.
right, but the other thing that comes with that, which is what my experience was, is that you get rejected.
Oh,
Yes.
Yes,
No.
big time.
Family
So-
members reject you.
Absolutely.
You're like the pariah. You're like the
Yes.
person who does not get invited to the family cookout because you're going to come and have
Yeah.
conversations that they're not interested in hearing, and they certainly don't want you to have with other people. And pick out like
Or
a
you're too
sore thumb
outspoken.
because you're outspoken.
Or you're saying it the wrong way. Yeah.
saying it the wrong way. You're asking all the wrong questions, and
Yes.
apart from that,
Yeah.
I look different because I'm not dressed like everybody else.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so that presents a problem. So you don't get invited to the wedding when family members are marrying. It just happens. The family members are marrying, let's say, white people. That has happened
Yeah.
to me. They just know we can't invite her. We can't invite her family members, or they're out there somewhere. So that happens, but you have to understand why that is the case and not take it personally. I don't take it personally. I see and understand it for what it is, quite honestly. But Carol, you wanted to say something, because what I want to finish by saying is that as an educator, I'm constantly about reading. Reading continues to be fundamental. Reading and researching and getting information. And right now, we have no excuses as Black people when it comes to reading, getting information, and finding out about ourselves and our history and so on, and connecting with people.
Greetings, family. Abi Osho here. I trust you are well and blessed. I'm inviting you to join me for my upcoming Healing Hearts online circle membership. It's monthly and it's open to all of our community, the Black and Brown sisters across the world. And so whilst it's in GMT time, you can join anywhere in the world. And it's a space where we get to come together to share our stories. And remember that we are the griots, we are the storytellers. I believe that this is in our DNA, but when we come together and share from our heart, it's a whole new experience. A place where we get to be heard, held and healed. It's extremely powerful. And I would so love for you to be there with me. The second offering that I have is my upcoming Healing Heart Circle retreat, which is a sister retreat. A small intimate group of us will be in Turkey, in Ayvalık, which is actually part of Izmir and is the land of the Afro-Turks. They have an extremely interesting story. So we will get to meet them. What we'll really get to do is we'll get to do the deeper work. We look at who we're becoming. We get to look at healing our wounds. We get to release those old unhelpful stories that we know are no longer serving us so that we can truly step into who we are becoming. It's going to be a powerful retreat and I would love for you to join me if you're feeling called. This is specifically for women that are in midlife. So please, if this is of interest to you, drop me a message. All the links will be below. I'll be more than happy to have a call with you. And yeah, let's see if we can make this happen. I am always celebrating the light that shines within you. Stay blessed. Bye.